of Pope Francis. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai offered Iran's condolences following the death of Pope Francis ahead of the Catholic Church at the age of 88. Let's listen in to what the minister said.
میکنم به همه مسیحیان جهان و همه موحدین و پیروان ادیان آسمانی درگذشت پاپ فرانسیس رو از خداوند بزرگ برای ایشون طلب آرامش میکنیم.
French President Emmanuel Macron paid tribute to Pope Francis, praising his lifelong dedication to the vulnerable and to the fragile. Macron said the pontiff consistently stood by those in need, embodying compassion and humility throughout his papacy and inspiring people across the world. Let's listen in to what the French President Emmanuel Macron had said.
Père n'est plus et je voulais ici dire toute la tristesse qui est la nôtre dans ce moment et la grande douleur, je le sais, qui est partagée par beaucoup en France, mais à travers la planète. Je veux adresser avant toute chose mes condoléances les plus sincères à l'ensemble des catholiques du monde entier, leur dire notre soutien, dire aussi la place toute particulière qui était la sienne dans notre cœur et à nos côtés. Il était avec nous en Corse il y a encore quelques semaines. Il avait été à nos côtés à Marseille il y a plusieurs mois et il a marqué durant son pontificat la France de plusieurs passages ainsi, avec cette carte sensible. Il a durant tout son pontificat été aux côtés des plus vulnérables, des plus fragiles, avec beaucoup d'humilité et un sens tout particulier dans ces temps de guerre et de brutalité, un sens tout particulier de l'autre, oui, et du plus fragile. Et en cela, il a été fidèle à une...
We are now joined by Joshua Barnes, anchor and correspondent for NewsX World, to discuss this further. Joshua, what updates have you got for us?
Yes, well, Thomas, of course, the mourning and the sadness felt by billions across the world is there, but we will, of course, be turning our attention shortly to who the next Pope may be. And there is a certain set of circumstances that will take place before the next Pope is chosen. We'll also come back slightly later to look at who those candidates could be. But just to give you an idea of how this works, there is a vote with cardinals below the age of 80 being allowed to take part in this secret vote that takes place inside of the Vatican. It takes place inside of the Sistine Chapel with the cardinals locked inside to not allow any outside interference. Now, these votes are typically capped at 120 cardinals, although it's important to understand that 138 would currently be eligible to vote. So we will have to wait and see as to what happens there. Now, any candidate that is chosen requires a 2/3 majority amongst these expected 120 voters. So in that instance, we're looking at 80 votes needed for the next Pope. Now, these votes can come in rounds. The votes, as I mentioned, will be made in secret. At least 80 are needed. Every time a vote is cast and the result is there will be smoke that is released. Now, the ballots are burnt, and this is using a chemical. If it's black smoke, then it means that no decision has been made. If it is white smoke, then the new Pope has been decided. Once the Pope is elected, then the top cardinal will announce his name from St. Peter's Basilica. And this normally happens 2 or 3 weeks after the death or resignation of a Pope. There is, of course, a period of mourning of 9 days before any of this process starts. Of course, cardinals need to make their way to the Vatican from across the world. So it depends how divided these cardinals are as to how long this process will take. There could be several rounds of voting. There could be a general amount of unity in who that next Pope should be. Of course, we're talking here about who will be the next Pope, but we can't forget the world is currently mourning. Catholics, Christians across the world, non-Christians and Catholics alike, mourning the death of Pope Francis. We've continued to show you those messages from world leaders. Sentiments will continue throughout the coming days and weeks for Pope Francis, the work that he has done on this celebration weekend.
Yes, Joshua, you mentioned that regardless of religion, regardless of race, the world has launched an outcry at the death of Pope Francis. What are some of the specific reactions that you can give me?
Yes, absolutely. So we have had reactions from a plethora of world leaders. The sentiments all very much the same. Keir Starmer's spoken about Pope Francis working for the poor. Giorgia Meloni speaking of her friendship with Pope Francis and saying that he looked out for everybody. Of course, Pope Francis's work in the ongoing conflicts. World leaders involved in fighting, like Volodymyr Zelensky, talking about Pope Francis's support for the Ukrainian people, civilians in the time of conflict who are facing adversity. The situation the same in Israel with hostages. The Israeli president sharing that sentiment of Pope Francis's wishes for hostages as well. Of course, Catholic leaders across the world, J.D. Vance, one of the last people to meet Pope Francis on that Easter Sunday service that took place yesterday while he was in the Vatican, of course, has now arrived in India for another 4-day visit. But Vance talking about Pope Francis and his work throughout his time as Pope, that 12-year period. Narendra Modi, another world leader who met with Pope Francis. King Charles, the King of Britain, also talking about his meeting and the work that Pope Francis has done. The majority of world leaders now have reacted and responded to this. That mourning period will continue, and the heartfelt condolences and prayers for Pope Francis will continue moving forward.
Yes, and Joshua, what can you tell us about the health issues that Pope Francis had previously to his death today at 7:35 a.m.?
Yes, absolutely. Well, we'll look at the most recent health issues that Pope Francis faced. He was admitted to hospital in mid-February with bronchitis. Now, he was at the Gemelli Hospital in Rome where his situation deteriorated. He spent over a month in hospital, 38 days in the Gemelli Hospital. His bronchitis developed and he was then treated for pneumonia. Spent several nights in intensive care units. There were fears for his life at that moment in time, clearly extremely ill in those moments. And he did spend an extended period of time in the Gemelli Hospital, as mentioned, until he was released last month. And he was able to return to very, very limited services and roles within his position as Pope and head of the Catholic Church. He was seen publicly for that Easter Sunday service that we have mentioned, but J.D. Vance made it clear in his comments that the Pope was clearly very unwell. Photos that we've seen showing the situation of the Pope. He has been in a wheelchair for 3 years or so now. His health has deteriorated, but we're looking at somebody who was, of course, 88 years old, and at this moment in time, of course, his death comes at a point where he was still carrying out his duties well into his 80s. So these difficulties he faced, he came through a lot of them, and now he has passed. Of course, the world continues to mourn him.
Joshua, thank you very much for joining us. We're now going to take a look at some other world reactions coming from all sorts of walks of life. The mother of a slain Israeli-American hostage has praised Pope Francis for advocacy for the Hamas-held captives on the Gaza Strip. We've obviously seen him praise and pray for both the captives held in Gaza and also the Palestinians who have been killed there. Rachel Goldberg Polin, who was among the families of the hostages who met with the Pope in November of 2023, said he felt our sorrow and suffering, and so we appreciated his advocacy on this topic and on trying to find peace and reconciliation. Francis had repeatedly called for the release of the hostages abducted in Hamas's October the 7th attack and for the end of the war it sparked. Hamish, Hirsch, Goldberg and 5 other families of other hostages were killed by their captives last year as Israeli troops closed in on the tunnel where they were being held. We also have some reactions coming in from Africa, where Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has written on social media platform X that he extends his deepest condolences on the passing of the Pope, and may his legacy of compassion, humility and service to humanity continue for generations to come. Staying in the African continent, Kenyan President William Ruto calls the passing of the Pope a big loss to the Christian world. Ruto and also praises Francis's unwavering commitment to inclusivity and to justice. Since becoming Pope in 2013, Francis made multiple trips to Africa. Yesterday, in his Easter message, Pope appealed for peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, and in South Sudan. The Vatican has said that Pope Francis's body will be laid in a coffin in the chapel at the St. Martha residence, where he lived at 6 o'clock GMT on Monday. The Holy See will also stated that His Eminence, the Most Reverend Cardinal Kevin Joseph Farrell, Carmelengo of the Holy Roman Church, will preside over the rite of certification of death and the laying of the body in the coffin. Meanwhile, the Italian National Olympic Committee called for all sporting events due to take place in Italy on Monday to be postponed following the death of the Pope, and said for a minute's silence to be observed at the events throughout the week. According to the CONI statement that said they invited national federations and all organisers of sporting events to suspend their competitions on Monday. Now you may be wondering, when were the Pope's final public appearances? Well, the Pope Francis made a number of public appearances after being discharged from hospital, where he'd been treated for double pneumonia on the 23rd of March. I want to give a brief timeline of showing the Pope's final public greetings over the past few weeks. On the 6th of April, he made a brief appearance in a wheelchair at the Vatican since he was first discharged from Gemelli Hospital in Rome. 3 days later, he had a private meeting with King Charles III and Queen Camilla. He then visited St. Peter's Basilica on April the 10th and was seen without his traditional papal attire. Over the Easter period, he made a surprise visit on Holy Thursday to Regina Coeli Prison in Rome, where he greeted inmates. 2 days later, on Easter Saturday, the Pope stopped unannounced to pray and greet some of the faithful at St. Peter's Basilica. He then made his final public appearance on Easter Sunday, where he was welcomed at St. Peter's Square by crowds, and he wished people a happy Easter Sunday. The same day, he met US Vice President J.D. Vance, who told the pontiff, "I pray for you every day." We are once again joined by Joshua Barnes, anchor and correspondent. Joshua, what updates have you got for us?
Well, yes, Tom, as I alluded to a few minutes ago, I want to talk through the potential candidates who may be in the running to replace Pope Francis. Of course, this process will be delayed as the mourning takes place for those across the world to celebrate Pope Francis, his life, and also what he did for the Catholic Church, but also for the world. So just to provide you some context, I mentioned a little while ago that 138 cardinals will be eligible or are currently eligible to vote for the next Pope. To give you some context, 110 of those were voted for or were installed by Pope Francis himself. And one of Pope Francis's big moves was to provide more diversity to cardinals that he puts in place. That means that unlike in some previous papal races, we could be looking at a wide variety of continents who could be home to the next Pope. We have European contenders, South American contenders, African contenders, and also contenders from Asia and East Asia as well. I want to start off with Europe. Cardinal Peter Erdo is a Hungarian cardinal who has been put as a potential contender. Moving to South America, in Venezuela, Cardinal Pietro Parolin is another cardinal who could be in the running for the next Pope. We move to Africa next, and Cardinal Peter Tursken is somebody who has also been put in the running. Moving to the Philippines, Cardinal Luis Tagle, giving you a real wide array of potential popes. And then moving on back to Europe and to Italy, Cardinal Matteo Zuppi as well. If you missed my previous comments, I just want to talk very briefly about that process of how a pope is chosen. Now, it is done by a vote. Cardinals from across the world, even those who I've mentioned here, will all cast their votes in the Vatican. They will lock themselves inside of the Sistine Chapel within Vatican City. The votes will be done in private, and any pope that is elected will need a 2/3 majority. Now, normally 120 cardinals will be voting. This time, I've mentioned just then, 138 are eligible. So we'll wait to see how many are casting that vote. But if we go off the average 120 or the normal 120, then that would mean 80 votes are needed. This could take rounds of voting, and the signal which will show if a new pope has been chosen is smoke, and a chemical is used to burn the ballot papers. It will either be black, and that means no pope has been chosen, and further votes will need to take place to reach that 2/3 majority until there is white smoke that comes out from a chemical used to burn those ballot boxes. And if there's white smoke, that means a new pope has been chosen. It could be one of those names I mentioned, but as I said, a lot of diversity, regional diversity, ethnic diversity here, so we could be looking across the world at the next pope.
Joshua, thank you very much. Let's now have a look at some of the world leaders